All right, so we're diving into some really fascinating stuff this time around.
Oh, yeah,
The
definitely.
Urantia book, and specifically we're going to be looking at paper 193,
Okay.
and this one is all about Jesus's final days,
Okay.
but not in the typical way that you think about it, like not the Sunday school version of it.
Right.
We're talking post-resurrection appearances,
Uh-huh.
18 of them, in fact,
Wow.
and a really wild concept that we're going to get into called Urantia.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I find fascinating about the Urantia book is how it uses this concept of Urantia to kind of paint this really detailed picture of this transition between the physical and the spiritual. It's not just about Jesus sort of appearing and disappearing. It's trying to give you a framework for understanding how he could interact in this way that kind of defies their understanding of the world.
Right.
Like, for example, imagine him just passing through walls.
Okay, that's not in the average gospel, I'll grant you that.
Right.
But it wasn't just parlor tricks, right?
Yeah.
He had some serious things to say in these appearances.
Oh, absolutely. Take his very first appearance in Jerusalem.
Okay.
He admonishes his followers, right? He reminds them that hearing his words isn't enough.
Right.
They have to truly comprehend them.
Wow.
Think about that. Even those who are closest to him, who walked with him daily, are being challenged to go deeper,
Yeah.
to move beyond blind faith into true understanding.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How often do we think we understand something but haven't really let it sink in on that deeper level?
Exactly. And the Urantia book doesn't shy away from this.
Yeah.
Later at Jacob's. Well, remember his earlier encounter there with the Samaritan woman Nolda, where he talks about living water.
Yeah. And now he's back, but this time he's talking about being born of the eternal spirit. I see what you mean about going deeper.
Precisely. It's not enough to just believe.
Right.
True eternal life, according to the Urantia book, comes from this spiritual rebirth,
Okay.
from accepting God's love and actively living it out.
So it's about internalizing the message, making it a part of who we are, not just something that we believe.
Exactly. And this theme of action of living faith is so vividly illustrated in his appearance in Tyre.
Tyre. Okay, so he's not just hanging around Jerusalem. Why Tyre?
Well, first of all, it shows that his outreach wasn't limited.
Right.
He traveled extensively in this Urantia form. But even more importantly, look at what he emphasizes, the fruits of the divine spirit.
Okay.
He's talking about how true believers demonstrate their faith through their actions.
Not just words, but how we treat each other, how we live our lives day to day.
Exactly. He draws this powerful comparison to dead branches for those who don't bear these fruits.
Right.
It's a stark image reminding us that true faith isn't passive.
Right.
It's about embodying those virtues, compassion, courage, honesty, in everything we do.
It's a high standard for sure,
Mhm.
but it also makes you think about how we sometimes compartmentalize our faith.
Yeah.
Like it's something we believe, but not necessarily something that consistently guides our actions.
It's a struggle for many, and this is where the story of Judas Iscariot becomes even more poignant.
Okay.
While Jesus is urging this active, loving faith,
Right.
Judas is grappling with his own inner turmoil, leading him down a very different path.
Yeah, talk about a contrast.
Right.
While Jesus is preparing for ascension, Judas is betraying him.
Yeah.
But this isn't your typical betrayal narrative, is it?
Not at all. The Urantia book goes beyond those simple explanations like greed or demonic influence.
Right.
It lays out 7 specific factors that contributed to Judas's downfall, framing it as this cautionary tale for all of us.
7 factors. That's a lot more nuance than I expected.
Right.
So what drives Judas to this? What's the first thing that sends him down this path?
The Urantia book highlights his deep isolation.
Okay.
He was a shut-in, as the text describes it.
Wow.
And, you know, while solitude can be beneficial in Judas's case, it seems to have bred this dangerous disconnect from the community that Jesus was building.
That's so interesting because Jesus constantly emphasized love, community, supporting one another.
Right.
And Judas was surrounded by that, but couldn't seem to access it himself.
Right.
It makes you think about the people in our own lives who might be struggling with that same isolation, even if they're physically present.
It's a poignant observation and one worth exploring further, but before we delve into the other factors that contributed to Judas's downfall, we need to shift our focus slightly. It's a bit of a jarring transition, but while Judas is grappling with these internal struggles, Jesus is preparing his disciples for his departure in a way that challenged their very understanding of his presence. You know, he doesn't simply ascend into heaven like those traditional narratives might have us believe.
Right.
Instead, his departure is described less like this grand exit and more like a fading away,
Okay.
which is interesting because it's consistent with his other transitions in and out of this Urantia state.
So not a lightning bolt from the sky kind of deal.
Not quite. The Urantia book describes it more like a gradual disappearance, almost as if he's slipping between dimensions.
It must have been mind-blowing for those who witnessed it.
Right.
No dramatic farewell tour, just poof, gone.
It really underscores the idea that Jesus' existence transcended their earthly understanding, even after all they'd seen and experienced alongside him.
Right.
But the story doesn't end there, does it?
Right, because you've got to wonder, what do the disciples do next?
Yeah.
I mean, talk about your world being turned upside down.
Right.
Their leader, teacher, friend, suddenly gone, and in such a strange way.
The book describes the scene of uncertainty,
Yeah.
of the disciples gathering, waiting, probably replaying everything Jesus had taught them, trying to make sense of it all.
Okay, but they're not just sitting around twiddling their thumbs, right?
Right.
This whole time, they've been following Jesus' instruction to stay put in Jerusalem, waiting for this promised gift of the Spirit of truth.
Yeah.
This has got to be where Pentecost comes in, doesn't it?
It does, and the Urantia book's account of Pentecost is fascinating.
Okay.
Because it doesn't depict it as this massive spectacle you might imagine.
No parting of the heavens or anything.
Not exactly. Instead, it emphasizes a subtler form of spiritual energy descending upon them.
Okay.
It's more about an internal experience of profound connection rather than this external display of power.
So what are we talking, like a collective meditation session? A bunch of first-century folks finding their inner Zen.
Well, it is described as this shared experience of divine energy,
Okay.
but manifesting in unique ways for each person present.
Okay.
Some experienced visions, others heard music, still others felt this overwhelming sense of peace.
It's interesting how the book highlights that diversity of experience even within this group of people who had all been so deeply impacted by Jesus.
Exactly. And it's not just about what they felt in that moment.
Okay.
The Urantia book emphasizes that this outpouring of the Spirit wasn't a one-time event. It marked the beginning of a new era, a new dispensation of spiritual awareness available to all humanity.
So it's not just about a select few being privy to this spiritual awakening.
Right.
This opens the door for everyone, right?
Exactly. It suggests that the same Spirit that empowered the disciples is accessible to everyone regardless of background or belief.
Wow.
It's a message of hope, of empowerment.
It's also a call to action, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, the disciples didn't just sit around basking in the glow of Pentecost.
Right.
They went out and shared Jesus' message with the world.
Yeah.
It's like this outpouring of the Spirit wasn't just for their benefit. It was to equip them to carry out their mission.
Absolutely. And that mission wasn't without its challenges,
Yeah.
disagreements, even arguments.
Yeah.
Remember, these were individuals with their own personalities, backgrounds, and interpretations of what they had learned from Jesus.
Which is where things get really interesting, right?
Yes.
Because the Urantia book doesn't shy away from the fact that even after Pentecost, there were still differences of opinion among Jesus' closest followers.
Oh, exactly. Take Simon Zelotes, for example.
Okay.
Here's a man who was deeply committed to the liberation of Judea from Roman rule.
Right.
After Pentecost, he goes into this period of intense reflection,
Okay.
almost like he's trying to reconcile his previous zeal for political revolution with Jesus' message of a spiritual kingdom.
Talk about a clash of ideologies.
Yeah.
It makes you think about how often we encounter similar situations today,
Right.
where people are trying to integrate their faith with their political beliefs, their cultural context, their own personal values.
Right.
It's rarely a simple equation.
Precisely. And then there's Thomas,
Right.
often remembered for his initial skepticism about Jesus' resurrection.
Right. Doubting Thomas.
The Urantia book, though, portrays him with a lot more nuance.
So he's not just relegated to the role of doubting Thomas.
Exactly. The book highlights his intellectual honesty, his need for evidence, and how Jesus, instead of condemning him, actually engages with Thomas's doubts,
Oh.
offering him proof.
But even after seeing is believing, Thomas still wrestles with his understanding of it all.
He does, and I think that's such an important aspect of the book's message.
Okay.
It's okay to have doubts,
Yeah.
to ask questions, to not have all the answers figured out.
Sure.
In fact, those doubts and questions can be catalysts for deeper understanding.
So it's less about blind faith and more about embracing the messy, often confusing process of seeking truth.
Exactly. And that process, as the Urantia book suggests, doesn't end with a single event, even one as powerful as Pentecost.
Okay.
It's an ongoing journey.
Right.
And the disciples' experiences after Jesus' ascension illustrate this beautifully.
It's like we've been talking about this whole time.
Right.
Just because you have this incredible spiritual experience doesn't mean you're suddenly immune to doubts,
Right.
disagreements, or even just plain old confusion.
Right.
And the Urantia book really drives that point home in its depiction of the apostles after Pentecost.
It's almost as if their individual journeys become even more pronounced after this shared experience.
Yeah.
It's not a matter of everyone suddenly getting on the same page and speaking with one voice. It's messier than that.
Right.
More human.
Which, let's be honest, makes a lot more sense, doesn't it? I mean, these are people who dedicated their lives to following Jesus.
Right.
Witnessing his miracles, hearing his teachings firsthand. And even they didn't just magically achieve perfect understanding overnight.
Exactly. And the Urantia book doesn't shy away from those ongoing struggles.
Right.
Remember how we talked about Simon Zelotes wrestling with his political ideals?
Yeah?
The book tells us that he eventually found a way to reconcile his zeal for a liberated Judea with Jesus' vision of a spiritual kingdom.
Okay.
But it wasn't a simple or immediate process.
So it's not about abandoning your convictions, but more about finding a way to integrate them with this new understanding of what it means to follow Jesus' teachings.
Precisely, and it's a process that many of us can relate to, wouldn't you say?
Wow.
Trying to find that balance between our existing beliefs and this evolving understanding of our faith.
Sure.
But it's not just about individual struggles, is it?
Right.
The Urantia book also highlights some pretty significant disagreements among the apostles themselves.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Like that whole debate between Peter and Nathaniel.
Exactly.
Wasn't that about how to best spread Jesus' message?
It was, and it gets to the heart of some pretty fundamental questions about Christianity.
Okay.
Peter, being the more traditionalist one,
Right.
believed they should focus on proclaiming Jesus as the Messiah.
Which makes sense, right? I mean, that's pretty standard Christian theology.
It is, but Nathaniel had a different perspective.
Okay.
He argued that they should continue emphasizing the broader message of the kingdom of God,
Yeah.
the same way Jesus did during his ministry.
So more about the universal message of love, compassion, and social justice.
Exactly.
Those core teachings that transcended any one religion or culture.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that the Urantia book doesn't present one perspective as right and the other as wrong.
Right.
It's more about acknowledging that even within this group of people who knew Jesus intimately,
Yeah.
there were different interpretations, different approaches to sharing his teachings.
And if they couldn't agree on a single interpretation, what does that tell us? It suggests that maybe there isn't one definitive answer,
Right.
one right way to understand or practice Christianity.
Right.
Perhaps it's more about engaging in that ongoing process of seeking, questioning, and evolving in our understanding.
Which honestly feels a lot more true to life, doesn't it?
It does.
I mean, faith isn't a destination, it's a journey. And like any journey, it's bound to have detours, roadblocks, and moments of uncertainty.
And that's where the true beauty of a text like the Urantia book lies. I think
so too.
it doesn't shy away from those complexities, those
Yeah.
uncertainties. It encourages us to embrace the messy, often contradictory nature of faith and to find our own path within it.
Which is a pretty amazing takeaway when you think about it.
It is.
We started this deep dive looking at Jesus' final days as depicted in the Urantia book.
Right.
We explored these extraordinary concepts like Urantia and this unique perspective on Judas's betrayal.
Right. And we delved into the events of Pentecost, that incredible outpouring of spiritual energy and how it impacted not just the disciples, but all of humanity.
And through it all, we've seen how the Urantia book challenges us to go beyond surface-level understandings, to ask difficult questions, and to embrace the ongoing journey of faith.
It's a journey that requires us to be both humble and courageous,
Yes.
open to new perspectives,
Yeah.
while also holding on to our own truths.
It's not always easy, but as the Urantia book so powerfully demonstrates, it's a journey worth taking.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll have to wrap up this deep dive into the Urantia book, but this is just the beginning, isn't it? There's so much more to explore within its pages.
Absolutely. So keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep opening your heart and mind to the infinite possibilities of faith. Who knows what profound truths you might uncover along the way.